blended learning, including blended learning in grades 4 through 12, blended learning in action, power up blended learning, and balance with blended learning. She is active on Twitter at Catlin_Tucker and writes an internationally ranked education blog at catlintucker.com. Dr. Catlin Tucker is dedicated to helping teachers blend technology and tradition to shift students to the center of learning and find balance in their teaching practice. Dr. Tucker, welcome to Southwest ISD. I will go ahead and turn this over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm thrilled to be able to join you guys today. I just worked with another group of leaders yesterday in this same capacity, kind of exploring blended learning models. And obviously for this current situation, a lot of your teachers are in, will be tying those blended learning models specifically to the concurrent classroom, which is what I've been calling the scenario where teachers have a group of students in a classroom physically and then some joining virtually. And I do know that that is a really challenging teaching assignment. And so how do we leverage these models to try to make that challenging assignment a little bit more doable or manageable? So I want to start our session today with a check-in. And I read an article where it was describing a strategy that Brene Brown uses when she begins her Zoom meetings with her team, where everybody will unmute and just share 2 words that for them in that moment kind of speak to what they're feeling, where they're at, what they're bringing to the meeting. And I just loved that idea of creating space for people to have 2 different, sometimes competing like emotions or feelings, and really honoring that at the start of a session. Now, obviously with upwards of 75 people in the room, that is hard to unmute and have everybody share. That would be our entire time together. And so we're gonna use a tool called Mentimeter. I would encourage you to open a tab, go to menti.com, and then leave this open all throughout the training today, because I'm going to be using it to engage with you guys or engage you guys throughout the presentation. And so if you go to menti.com, it's up at the top. It'll ask you for a code once you get there. All right, so the biggest word in your cloud is excited, which is the most people in the virtual room have input that word, because the bigger the word, the more people have input it. And then we have open-minded, hopeful, curious, ready, anxious. So this is a very positive cloud. I literally just got done working with a group of teachers, and I think their big words were tired, anxious, overwhelmed, and frustrated. Those were like huge words in their cloud. So it's great that you guys are feeling motivated and optimistic, especially as leaders. That's so important for the teachers that we're working with, that we bring that energy and that open-mindedness and that enthusiasm. But I also want to kind of acknowledge that there are words like tired, and overwhelmed in this particular group, right? So even as leaders, all of this is so challenging. And I think creating that space for our teachers to share their experiences, and when I'm working with teachers to kind of get them thinking about how they have their students sharing their experiences is really important. So in today's session, we're going to focus first on just kind of orienting this conversation in the theoretical framework that is really cited frequently in the literature around online and blended learning, because I think it's just helpful to think through how do we imagine the structure? How do we think about online and blended learning? And then we're going to get into the actual blended learning models. And obviously, you guys in my book, Blended Learning in Action, there's a chapter for each of these different models we're going to get into. I want you guys to have opportunities as groups to connect for discussion, but also for some kind of planning and creative activities where you can think about taking some of these concepts and doing something with them. Because 3 hours is a long time to listen to anybody talk. I don't care who it is. So I want to build in opportunities for you guys to be thinking about some of these strategies and figuring out, if I'm a leader and I'm saying, teachers should be trying to use station rotation model to kind of meet the demands of the concurrent classroom, how might I use station rotation model in a staff meeting or in a professional learning context, right? So we're modeling the value of these things. And also thinking, just by going through the process of thinking through the different models and how we might use them as leaders or instructional coaches, I think it also helps us to kind of face some of those challenges our teachers are going to encounter when they get into some of this design work. So know that there will be moments where I send you guys into breakout rooms and you'll be engaging in conversation and collaborative tasks together. All right. Oh, I can take a peek at my messy desktop. There we go. So my own research is grounded in this theoretical framework called the community of inquiry. It was developed very much to meet the needs of the kind of demands of online teaching and learning. And it's composed of these three overlapping presences: the teaching presence, the social presence, and the cognitive presence. And it's the interplay between these different presences that really creates that community of inquiry. And I use this when I'm working with teachers and leaders as a way to kind of think about both the student role, but also the role of, the individual role, but then the role of the community in the learning process, because learning is a really active process and it is very much composed of that individual work of exploring and reflecting, but also we kind of test out our ideas with a community, right? Where we kind of confirm what we think we're learning by engaging in conversation with other members of the community that might challenge us and stretch our thinking. And so part of what I love about the community of inquiry is this focus on the value of community as part of the learning process, but also kind of on this idea of inquiry and allowing students kind of innate curiosity to drive some of the learning happening. Now, to create a real learning community, and I think this is one of the things that can be really challenging in a concurrent classroom, is making sure that students who are joining virtually feel like part of the community, those, with the kids who are there physically. But a learning community has shared goals. It's very much grounded in that mutual trust and respect. I think it works best if there's a true partnership between teacher and learner and the members of the learning community, the individual students in the class. It encourages and really thrives when there's regular open communication, when learners are asked to engage with each other in collaborative tasks. And there's this acknowledgement that we are stronger as a whole than we are individually, right? This group has a collective intelligence, and let's tap into that collective intelligence. So when we think about the teaching presence identifies the teacher's main roles and responsibilities in an online or blended learning course. And it kind of breaks those roles and responsibilities into three big buckets. And why it's important for teachers to kind of understand those roles and responsibilities and then feel like they can effectively fulfill those roles and responsibilities is because those teachers with higher levels of self-efficacy, the ones who have more confidence in their abilities, those are the teachers who expend more time and effort in their practice. They're also more willing to take risks and experiment. And I would argue a lot of what teachers are doing right now is risky, or, it feels risky. They're trying new stuff. They're experimenting with strategies. So we want them to be willing to do that. They tend to use more innovative and progressive teaching methods that are more persistent and resilient in the face of obstacles. And they tend to generally, those teachers with higher levels of self-efficacy are more committed to the teaching profession and report better or stronger kind of higher levels of job satisfaction. And one of my big fears in this moment is just it's so challenging for a lot of teachers, and our most experienced teachers are feeling very much like, I feel like a first-year teacher again. And I was so confident in my ability, and now I feel like I'm floundering and I'm failing. And I don't want to lose good people. Like, I want great people to stay in this profession. And so as leaders and coaches, it's critical that we really help teachers to develop that self-efficacy, that the feelings of confidence, so they stay engaged in their work, because there is a real clear link between teacher engagement and student engagement. And that's another fear I have, is that if teachers are so exhausted and overwhelmed, they're not really engaging cognitively, emotionally, and socially in this work, that's going to have really negative impacts on their students. And that's actually teacher engagement in blended learning environments was what I focused on for my own dissertation. And so it was really interesting seeing how critical that piece is to the learning puzzle more generally. So those three big buckets are the roles that the teaching presence identifies for teachers is one, designer. And I always refer to this in my work with teachers as architect of learning experiences. And I use the word architect really intentionally because it's really, as a designer, we're drawing up the plans, we're creating the blueprint, but students do the building. Students construct the knowledge. That's how I want us to approach our design work in education. There's also that role as instructor, right? Where we have a degree of subject area expertise or, pedagogical expertise. And so we kind of spend some time in that role, transferring information and explaining things to students. And then we have our role as facilitator. And I think about this as the teacher, as coach, right? How are we sitting beside kids and really supporting their individual growth, their individual development toward learning objectives? So I'm curious, from your vantage point as leaders and coaches, what role or which of these three roles do you feel like you see your teachers spending the most time and energy in? So this is just a multiple choice. You just have one. Like I said, it's the same menti.com. So when I change the screen, it should automatically change for you guys. And I'll give you just a second to kind of share out. All right. So if you still haven't contributed yours, feel free to keep adding it. So as of this moment, we have 58 responses. 44 are saying they see teachers spend the most time in that instructor role. And then 9 are seeing teachers spend the most time in the design role. And then 6, our lowest number, as the facilitator role. Now, I worked with a group of, I think there were 55 people yesterday in my leadership training, and this is their report. So of the 50 people who responded, not a single person said facilitator role. And it's shocking, but not shocking, right? Like, it's exactly what I would expect, is that we're seeing teachers spend the most time and energy in that instructor role. And I think that that is a real issue. And part of why I say that, because I feel like a lot of the work I'm doing with teachers is, let's take a good hard look at what we value about ourselves in this role. Because I know many teachers who feel like the more technology is involved, or the more technology is a presence in the classroom, in education, like the less their job matters, right? They're threatened by the increase of technology. And my message is, well, if we place the value on our work as being expert at the front of the room, literal room, virtual room, doesn't matter, then yeah, technology is scary, right? Because Google knows way more than I could ever keep in my brain. And so if I value myself as this expert, then this whole situation with, like the change in schedules and the influx of technology, then it's scary and threatening, because maybe I'm not the expert of how to leverage technology to do this job. So I feel like I'm floundering on a lot of different levels. Whereas if we can get teachers to really place value on their role as connector, as facilitator, as supporter, that human part of the work we do can never be replaced. And it is so important. But for some reason in education, there's more value, and with a lot of the populations I work with, on this idea of I'm an expert versus I'm a facilitator. And so how do we kind of get teachers to reimagine and to value these other roles that they really should be kind of focusing on in the classroom? So that hopefully they aren't threatened by technology and they're not threatened by these changes. It's just kind of the evolving landscape of education in our current context or world. And so when I'm working with teachers around this role as designer and thinking through like, how do we architect learning experiences, a lot of teachers are feeling like a fish out of water in online learning and even with blended learning. And so I always remind them, like, okay, you're going to do the same thing you would do planning for offline learning, in the sense that you're starting from a place of your standards, right? And you're aligning learning with key standards or skills, and everything you design is going to blossom out of that. I really keep reminding teachers, like in this moment where so many teachers are frustrated by what they perceive as lack of student engagement, lack of student motivation, is we really need to like prioritize those 4 C's of 21st century learning. How are we architecting learning experiences that encourage kids to think critically, that ask them to engage in conversation and communicate with one another, give them tasks that they have to work on together and collaborate together, encouraging them to be creative and not to lose that creativity just because they're learning in part online. I also think that as we move away from kind of that one size fits all teacher led lesson, then we have this opportunity to really think intentionally about where can kids during a lesson or a learning experience or a unit, where did they get to make decisions, right? Where is their voice and choice? Because if you look at any of the research on motivation, it's clear that the more autonomy and agency a student has, the more likely they are to be engaged. And so where are we building that into the learning experiences? And I often remind teachers, like very gently, there are kids that spend all day in class, all week in class, who never get to make a decision. They're told what to do, how to do it, what they're going to produce to demonstrate they learned. And so that can have a really negative impact on their motivation over time. I also want teachers in this moment where they're working in these concurrent classrooms, they have kids learning online. We have to be so intentional to build mechanisms into our lessons, into our units to collect formative assessment data, right? Are we checking for prior knowledge or what they already know at the start of a learning experience? Are we checking for understanding during the learning experience? Because the more we collect that formative assessment data, the more likely they are to start consistently differentiating. And I love the idea of getting to personalization, but I feel like we have to be consistently differentiating for groups of learners first, so that then we can start think about how do we start to design these learning pathways for individual learners. I think another conversation that is happening a lot with the teachers I'm working with around their design work is they have to be really thoughtful about what is it that they're asking kids to do synchronously versus what are they doing asynchronously, right? Because the synchronous time together, those are the activities that really should be the ones that benefit from human connection, social learning, versus the asynchronous work, which are any kind of learning activities that are going to be better when kids can control the time, the place, and the pace of their learning. So I walk through and talk with teachers, like, think about those activities that you would be more successful at if you have control over time, place, and or pace of learning. Like anytime we ask kids to engage with information, it's going to be helpful if they can control the pacing at which they process, consume that new information, be it in a text, a video, a podcast, a curated list of resources, a virtual museum tour. When we ask kids to engage in discussion online, so whether that is video-based discussion for younger learners on Flipgrid, whether that is text-based discussion for older learners using like Google Classroom, having time to think about a question, articulate a response, read and reply to the responses of other students, that is going to make that experience more rewarding, I think, for students. You're going to get better responses. If kids are doing any spiraling back and revisiting concepts or practicing skills that they've already gone over, some of that practice and review, if it's not the first time they're doing it, really lends itself to having some time and some control over the pacing. When we ask kids to research, explore, or even reflect and kind of develop some of those metacognitive muscles, those pieces, again, just giving kids time is going to make that generally more successful. And so as we start to think about the concurrent classroom and what's happening synchronously versus what's happening asynchronously, I think really reminding teachers to like take critical eye to, would this be better if kids can have that control, or would it be better if kids can connect with other learners? So those synchronous learning experiences really should be the ones that are going to benefit from the connection. So I know we're in the beginning of November, and a lot of teachers are like, oh yeah, I built community. We did icebreakers the first couple weeks of school. That's a great start. But community is something that has to be nurtured and maintained over time. And so how are they continually kind of building on that work that they started the year with? So community building, relationship formation, leading some of that interactive modeling when you're kind of teaching kids how to employ a specific strategy works really well synchronously. You know, if we are going to use this really limited synchronous time we have with our students for instruction, then at the very least, I'd like to see that differentiated with groups with different needs, at different skill levels, language proficiencies, and hopefully we're moving toward more of that personalized instruction where we can do some almost that one-on-one coaching with kids to meet their specific needs. When kids are really kind of practicing and applying, they're in the early stages of working with a new concept or strategy, I think that's really helpful to be in a community context where they can get support from peers or their teacher. If you're going to be doing real-time conversations to complement some of those asynchronous discussions, pulling that into the classroom can be helpful into small group dynamics, fostering collaboration. So even as we think about the concurrent classroom, you know, we're probably still have some limitations on student movement. It's not like we're going to be shoving desks together and using a bunch of shared materials. So even thinking about where are those shared virtual spaces, collaborative suites online, where we can get kids in those shared spaces collaborating, whether they're in a physical classroom or they're joining remotely. And then also, I would love to see teachers prioritizing feedback and pulling that into their work with kids, really giving students feedback on things that they're working on as they're working on it, giving kids really focused, actionable feedback. And especially for those kids who are joining remotely, feedback is how kids in the online environment feel seen and supported. Without feedback, it feels like a barrage of assignments being thrown at them and then a bunch of grades surfacing in a grade book, right? Where is that support? How are we valuing the process? So from my own research, the thing that's fascinating about this design work is it is both cognitively engaging and cognitively challenging. So it really helps if teachers kind of have some time and energy that they can dedicate to that design work. Even better if they can kind of collaborate and connect with peers who teach similar things. So if you have a PLC structure, really encouraging them to kind of work collaboratively to design experiences using different blended learning models or trying to target very specific pedagogical problems they're encountering with their design work. And then as much as possible as leaders kind of communicating to teachers, like it's unlikely, especially when kids are online, but just in general in this moment that we're going to cover the volume of information that we might have or standards that we might have before. So how do we kind of take more of a less is more? Not that students learn less, like the learning can be really rich and rigorous and deep, but just letting teachers know that like, as opposed to racing through curriculum, how are we designing these learning experiences that are really going to help students understand and retain this information that we want them to learn? Now, the second role is that of instructor. And like you guys, I see probably the most time and energy going into this role as well when I first start coaching teachers. There is a lot of value in a lot of teachers' minds in this role of expert, right? Expert at the front of the room. And what I really want to do is take that instructor role and kind of reimagine the whole thing. So when we're talking about online learning specifically, there are kind of two ways that teachers can approach the instructor role, right? They can capture instruction in video, or they can pull it into video conferencing. If they're in a classroom with students, they can pull that into, I would like to see small group work with students, but being really kind of thoughtful about why we're dedicating like real-time instruction to specific things. So when teachers are debating, like, do I do video? Do I pull it into a synchronous session online or in the class? My message is, if you're going to say it the exact same way to everybody, make a video. Really kind of reserve that teacher-student time, that synchronous time for high value kind of interactions. So if you want to capture a short lecture or a mini lesson, do that in a video, right? So even when I was teaching English, you know, if I'm going to explain what a thesis statement is, what needs to go in it, where it belongs in your introduction paragraph, everybody needs to hear that explanation. So I'm going to make a video, and then I'm going to work alongside kids as they start to craft their thesis statements and give them feedback as they're working, and give the students who are not strong writers, scaffolds and support so they can do that. I'd rather spend my time supporting that process than talking at kids about what a thesis statement is. So capturing some of those explanations everybody needs to hear, if we're explaining a strategy, or even we can capture those kind of models or think alouds for kids, particularly for those kids working online, having access to video explanations and video models can really support them when they are practicing and applying on their own. And I work with a lot of teachers who, I don't know that they experience the value of video. And so they're not like really excited to do this. But I remind them, like, look at the way most young people learn when they're not in a classroom. Whether they want to make a rubber band bracelet at age 5, or they want to learn how to put on makeup or play a video game, they're watching YouTube. They're watching a little clip, they're pausing, and they're trying it. They're watching a little more, they're pausing, and they're trying it. Anytime I want to learn how to use a new tech tool, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to YouTube, I'm watching tutorials. And so how do we leverage that way in which kids are already learning in this moment? I'd also love to see teachers providing instruction in videos or directions in videos. So especially those who are juggling a concurrent classroom, the more you can capture those quick directions for what kids need to be doing in a video that they can access, the less teachers feel that pressure to stand at the front of the room orchestrating the entire lesson. And then also onboarding kids to technology, right? If we're teaching them how to use a tool, right? Hey, we're going to use Flipgrid. Here's how you log in. Here's how you record something. Making a video so they can kind of self-pace through that is really beneficial. Whereas when we think about synchronous instruction, whether it's small group in a classroom, whether it's video conferencing online, let's use these opportunities to connect learners, again, building that learning community, driving deeper thinking around content. So instead of using it to introduce information, let's dig into these concepts. Let's talk about them, engage that kind of higher order thinking around concepts. Encouraging kids to surface their wonderings, their questions, confusions, collecting formative assessment data, right? Just even in a teacher-led station, whether it's virtual or in person, just kind of listening to what kids say, listening to their conversations, watching them try to, tackle a particular task, that all yields such really helpful information as an educator to know who's getting it and who's not getting it and where are the gaps. And that's harder to do in a whole group dynamic, quite frankly. Guiding that practice, and then also just creating time for kids to share work in progress. So getting feedback from the community on what they're doing. So I'd love to see teachers grouping with a specific purpose in mind, right? So if we're working with the whole class in a single moment, be it in video conferencing or in person, that, I guess that works well if we're trying to build community, we're introducing some general concepts that we're going to be diving into over the course of the week, just kind of providing kind of a overview of things that we're going to be tackling in a week, all lend themselves to whole group sessions. But I'd like to see teachers really creating space for more small group dynamics, more small group sessions where they can get closer to differentiating instruction, engaging all learners. So particularly for those teachers who are working with kids online, getting them engaging in those video conferencing teacher-led sessions is critical. And then also collecting formative assessment data becomes really key. And in those small group sessions, we're going to be able to identify those kids who need more, right? They need the one-on-one, they need the personalized instruction, they need some reteaching, some scaffolds. We can also use this conferencing time to check in with students about progress, because I know right now in so many school districts, just grades are tanking, kids are struggling. And so are we making time to connect with them and figure out what's working, what's not working, what do you need from me as your teacher to really re-engage in this process or feel successful in this work that we're doing? And then the last role is that of facilitator. And I really think about this, like I said, is that's our role as a coach, but also as a learning partner. I want teachers to start to see their students as true partners in their learning journey. I don't think we can really get to a place of really embracing personalization until we see our students as capable partners. And to create that partnership, we have to build that trust and respect within the community, but individually with learners. It's helpful if we have kind of articulated the why behind our work and engage students in some goal setting. So we have a shared purpose and we're using goals to guide our work together. Engaging in open, honest communication. In so many classrooms, communication tends to be kind of this one-way street from teacher to student. And I'd love to see students have more avenues to engage in kind of that open, honest conversation with their teachers and with their fellow students. Timely, actionable feedback. I've never met a teacher who doesn't say, oh yeah, no, I know feedback's really important. But as quickly as they'll acknowledge that feedback is important, they'll explain why it's so hard to make time for feedback, right? Because it follows them into their lives outside of school. So how do we lean on blended learning models to pull some of that feedback into the classroom? And instead of giving feedback on everything, really focusing feedback so that students can act on that feedback. Balancing the power dynamics within a classroom by really allowing kids a high degree of agency, building in those opportunities for voice and choice, and then just being committed to learning together. And I think this is another one that is so important, particularly in this moment where everything is kind of new, everything's kind of, the whole situation's fluid. And so just being honest with kids that we're learning right alongside them, I think is really critical. So as teachers embrace their facilitation role, they really have to think about how are they engaging kids in thinking about their thinking, in kind of building some of those metacognitive muscles. So kind of going through some of the processes of goal setting versus monitoring student progress. How do we engage students in the act of monitoring and tracking kind of their own progress and reflecting on their growth over time? How are we building in those moments to conference with kids and using their goal setting, whatever they've said they want to accomplish in their goal setting sessions to kind of guide those conversations? And one of the things, because you'll hear me talk about feedback repeatedly, one of the things I highlight to teachers and I think is worth mentioning is that in a study of students learning online, it was really clear that students perceived audio and video feedback as more detailed, more thorough, more personalized, and more motivating than text-based feedback. So how are teachers kind of leveraging these different avenues to give students feedback so it's not always text-based feedback? Maybe it's real-time feedback sessions in the classroom or real-time feedback sessions in video conferencing session, or using those screen recording like Screencastify to do a quick screen recording and talking through what we're seeing in a student's work. So just figuring out how do we give students more consistent feedback that's focused, that they can act on, that they are going to be motivated by. So I want to get into our first breakout room. This one will be for discussion. Some of your other breakouts will be more activity-based. So I want to give you guys a chance. So we just went through the community of inquiry teaching presence and kind of unpacking some of these teacher roles. And I would love for you guys to chat about, like, are you seeing teachers using video to transfer information? Or are you still seeing them primarily doing this during the synchronous time they have with kids? If teachers recorded videos or curated resources to transfer information, how can you see them using the time they're creating to connect with learners? Like, how can we get them making that transition from I'm an expert transferring information to I'm a facilitator guiding students as they work? How might dedicating time to working with small groups and conferencing with individual learners impact both teacher engagement and teacher satisfaction, as well as student satisfaction and student engagement? Are you seeing much of this right now? If so, like, explain, what are you seeing? What's working? How might you support teachers in thinking differently about their roles and the value that they're bringing to these students? And do you feel like your teachers really view their students as partners? And like, how might a partnership approach impact teachers' learners. So you don't have to cover all of these. You guys can even pick and choose. If there's ones that for you as a group are more interesting or you want to start there, feel free to go out of order, spend your time all on one question, bounce around. And if you don't know everybody in the room, I would definitely start with an introduction. Now, as soon as we start breakout rooms, you guys will not see my screen, which is always fascinating to try to juggle that. So what I have for you is in this Mentimeter, whenever you guys are in breakout rooms, there is an accompanying slide. So I have the discussion questions on the slide for you. So as long as one person in your group has this open, you guys will have access to those discussion questions. And then I also made it that you can ask a question on any slide. So you'll see this little like discussion bubble icon. So if you guys have a question at any point during today and you're like, oh, I wish we could get Catlin in this breakout room and ask her a question, just post it to the slide. I'll answer it. Or if you include the breakout room, I can pop directly into your breakout room. So I'm going to see. Okay, I'm not in charge of the breakout room. So if we can start the breakout rooms and open those up for folks, that would be wonderful. And I'll set the timer for 10 minutes on my end. And I'll pop in and out of breakout rooms just to listen, observe, and learn from you guys. But again, of course, if I'm in your room and you have a question, feel free to ask or add it to the Mentimeter slide. All right, so I think we have everybody back in the main room. And so I want to transition to talking specifically about blended learning and blended learning models, and then thinking about them, on their own, but then also in the context of this concurrent classroom dynamic that a lot of our teachers are kind of going to be wrestling with. So as we kind of move into this conversation about blended learning, one of the things that I like to acknowledge is that, there are like complex definitions of blended learning. I know you can go online and look at like the Christensen Institute, and their definition is like, a paragraph, and it's definitely the most cited definition on blended learning. But when I'm working with teachers, I like to really hone in and I emphasize this kind of statement at the bottom, like blended learning as active engaged learning online combined with active engaged learning offline. And the online component, like pre-COVID, when I work with elementary teachers, a lot of that online work, it was happening exclusively in the classroom. Whereas for some secondary, teachers working with secondary students, that would extend beyond the classroom. So lots of different ways to combine this online and offline learning. And in this moment where some of our kids are learning remotely, I also want to make sure that we're still building in those breaks from the screen, right? That tactile, experiential learning, so they're not staring at a computer screen all day long. So for me, blended learning is this umbrella term, and within the umbrella are lots of different models, and the various models give students different degrees of control over these four kind of elements of their learning: time, place, pace, and path. So they're probably not gonna control all of these things all the time, but the goal is to give them more control over these aspects of their learning. And the different models give them kind of different degrees of control over these aspects of their learning. So when I work with teachers, typically we kind of focus on the rotation models, which work really well in the classroom. And as I started kind of working with teachers in this concurrent classroom scenario, I was really starting to kind of unpack some of the challenges of that particular teaching assignment. And every time I tried to imagine how do we address a specific challenge, my thinking always went back to blended learning models and how they might help us to kind of manage this, like these kids who are coming to the class and learning in these two kind of different learning landscapes. So some of the challenges that are specific to the concurrent classroom, one is kind of the inequality of teacher attention. So if kids in the classroom can raise a hand or yell out and ask for help and support, they're always going to command more of the teacher's attention than the students who are joining virtually. And so one of the strategies that I've encouraged the teachers teachers I'm coaching to use are to provide all students, those in class and those online, with the same avenue to ask questions or seek support. So whether that is sending a message via an app like Remind, or whether it's the teacher setting up a virtual queue that kids can add their name and request to with something like a classroom queue. Or even like I did with you guys, making it so that they can allow students to ask questions on something like a Mentimeter, so the teacher can track them. And so it takes a degree of training to get the kids who are used to just kind of blurting things out or raising a hand and capturing attention to use this avenue. But that way, everybody has the same way in which to ask their questions or ask for additional help. Another strategy that I've seen teachers use with success is actually creating their groups by mixing in-class students and online students. Now, in order to create mixed groups within the class, it becomes necessary that, the kids in class, they have access to like a breakout room, they have earbuds, so there's more tech needed to make that work. But if you have students grouped online and in person, then those online students have the in-person kids to kind of lean on, and vice versa. The short kind of attention span, I think this is a challenge no matter what, but particularly in this moment. So I really encourage teachers, again, like, identify your target standards, stay focused, kind of embrace a little bit of a less is more approach to what you're trying to get through in a lesson. Chunk the information you're presenting. Remember, working memory is really small in the brain, so it's not that helpful to like talk at kids for a prolonged period of time anyway. And then where can we lean on video so that we're not like talking at kids during this concurrent class experience? And then lack of student engagement is a huge issue. So kind of organizing the lesson in like 20-minute chunks where we have kids rotating through different activities so they're not being asked to sit with a particular activity for too long. Really designing with an eye on keeping students in that active, engaged kind of learner position where they're doing or they're thinking about what they're doing, right? They're an active, engaged learner in the lesson. And then as much as possible, inserting polls or check-ins or formative assessments so that we can be collecting data to figure out how are kids doing? What are they getting? Where are the gaps? Where do I need to spend some of my time and attention? So as I said, most of the models that most of the work I'm doing with teachers who are in like a traditional school setting are with the rotation models, and how to leverage those for, our current scenario. Then you have kind of other models that go further toward online learning as the driver. So flex model, usually that's when a district has bought like a really like complete curriculum and it's more like a plug and play, and the teacher is very much that coach just supporting student progress. You have the a la carte model where kids might take an online class to supplement their schedule because that class isn't offered at the school or because they're in credit recovery. And then you have enriched virtual, which is most of the learning is happening online. So where we're going to live today and what we're going to talk about today really falls into this rotation model category. So station rotation, flipped learning within a whole group rotation, and then playlist model that really kind of demands that the teacher drive that experience. And for me, when I'm trying to articulate the benefits of blended learning, because, whenever we're asking teachers to shift practice, I think there needs to be a little bit of a nod to what are the benefits for you in putting this time and energy into shifting practice. And so by moving from whole group lessons that are primarily teacher-led to blended learning models where students have more control, and the experience isn't going to be this kind of one-size-fits-all approach, we have more opportunities to, at the very least, differentiate for groups of learners and hopefully work toward personalizing learning for individual students. It frees teacher from feeling like they're kind of trapped at the front of the room in that expert role and allows them to embrace more of that facilitation role where they're working directly with students. What was fascinating in my own research was that the teachers who were participated in the study, they taught blended learning courses and traditional courses. And they almost all said they felt closer. They had stronger relationships with the students in their blended learning courses because they had more time to work with small groups and individual students to meet their specific needs. And that helped them to build relationships with kids over time. Blended learning allows us to give more agency over the learning process to kids, allow them to make more decisions about their learning. I think it provides opportunities to create the time and space to pull things like feedback and assessment into the classroom, be it a physical or a virtual classroom. These things often just like follow teachers into their lives beyond school. And as a result, sometimes they're neglected, right? We're not given the feedback we know we need to be because it's so time consuming and it's our evenings and it's our weekends and we're juggling families at home. So how do we create time and space to pull that into the classroom experience? So the station rotation model is where we're going to start. And what's really interesting about the station rotation model is that early on in the pandemic, I got so many notes from teachers that were like, I love the station rotation model, but like now we're online, how do I use it? Or now we're in a hybrid and I've got a concurrent classroom, how do I use it? And it's a really flexible, adaptable model. And all of the benefits of station rotation are retained, even if it's happening entirely virtually. And so it's been a really interesting model to play with for this moment. But when I explain to teachers like why this is valuable, and it's a lot easier to sell to elementary, you'll get a lot of secondary teachers who are like, no, I do like a single lesson. I write an agenda on the board. That's how I design and facilitate lessons. But I share these benefits with secondary teachers and, explain that this is a model that's beneficial K-12. It's not relegated to a particular grade level, elementary or secondary. So we get to create these smaller learning communities in the larger class. So instead of shepherding a group of 30, 32 kids through a lesson, we're really kind of have these smaller learning communities of 6 to 8 students working together, navigating tasks. We're working directly with them. So as a teacher, there's time built into a station rotation in the form of that teacher-led station for us to work directly with small groups of learners. So we can differentiate learning activities more effectively. We can provide those scaffolds and supports. We can figure out which group, like what a specific group needs to spend time practicing and reviewing. We can encourage within the group dynamic, collaboration and communication, really getting students leaning on each other and using each other as resources. And they also have a little bit more control over the pace at which they progress through the different learning activities at the various stations. So the way to think about this right now in our socially distant or concurrent classroom scenario is that instead of a station, and in our minds thinking about a physical location in the classroom, we're thinking about a station as a learning activity. And instead of a physical rotation, it's kids shifting and moving between various learning activities. So if there is restricted movement in the classroom, kids don't physically have to pick up their stuff and move to another location to shift to the next learning activity. But what I do want teachers thinking about, and we're going to kind of dig into some of this a little bit as you guys work in your groups to think through a station rotation, is there's lots of different ways to use the teacher-led station, the online station, and the offline station. I see a lot of teachers who spend their teacher-led station talking at kids. And so how do we break that up? How do we make that time more engaging, dedicate time to modeling and feedback and collecting formative assessment data? How do we use these online stations in dynamic ways, right? Yes, there is personalized practice and programs that teachers can lean on, but that's not the only way they can use these online stations. How are they getting kids researching and exploring, collaborating on shared tasks, researching to design something, right? Whether it's an infographic or a digital story, just letting kids be really creative in that online space. And then same for the offline learning, right? That let's think beyond worksheets and pen or pencil paper practice and really think about all the ways we can engage kids in offline kind of tactile learning. So the template that I share with teachers who are working entirely online or working in the concurrent classroom is this virtual station rotation lesson. And usually I will have teachers focus in on the teacher-led station and think about that as their synchronous time with kids. So maybe if they have kids joining virtually, they're joining for a teacher-led station at a particular moment in time. And maybe they get to work through the online station and the offline offline station or learning activities kind of at their own pace. And maybe that happens asynchronously. So kind of thinking about this more flexibly about what kids are doing synchronously versus asynchronously. And so we have that teacher-led station where the class is broken up into 3 groups. Each group is going to have their time with the teacher. Depending on how the teacher groups the students, they might have 2 in-class teacher-led stations with 2 groups who are in the physical classroom. And then they might jump into a video conferencing call with the group that's composed of students who are joining remotely. Like I said, I've had some teachers do mixed groups. That can be a lot to juggle for some. For others, they love it and it works really well. And then as we think about the online and offline stations, really thinking about what kinds of activities would lend themselves to kids having more control over time and pace of those kinds of activities. And then as kids are doing offline learning at home, how are they going to document and share that learning? Are they going to take a picture? Are they going to record a quick video sharing what they did? So that's one piece of the workflow that teachers have to consider. So we'll start with the teacher-led station. And like I said, when I go in, I observe teachers, a lot of times what I see at that teacher-led station is a lot of teacher talk. So we want to explore strategies for structuring that teacher-led time that allows students to have a voice in that station, that really goes beyond just direct instruction for them, but really starts to get them thinking critically, engaging in conversation, collaborating. And as a teacher, how are we using the design to get closer to differentiating for the needs of different learners? So I go through and I go through 5 different ways to structure this time with teachers. And I'm going to be turning it over to you guys shortly to kind of think through your own station rotation and kind of focus on that leader-led station or teacher-led station, and using one of these strategies possibly to kind of model how this might work for teachers. So the first one is hook the group, which I love this strategy because it kind of inverts the traditional approach. So instead of the teacher leading with instruction and modeling, the teacher presents an unfamiliar problem, a challenge, or a task, and lets kids wrestle with it, right? So the goal is to get kids comfortable in a place of productive struggle, which most kids are not comfortable in that place. As soon as they hit something they don't know, they're like, I don't know how to do this. Like, I give up. And I don't want them to give up. Like, how many things are they going to encounter in life that they don't immediately know how to do and they're going to have to figure out? So as a group, they have to think critically. They have to have a conversation, like, how should we approach this? What strategy should we use? What does this remind us of? They're going to have to kind of collaborate and maybe think outside the box. And as a teacher, listening and observing these conversations are fascinating. Like what you learn about what kids know, what strategies they're comfortable using, where the gaps are. And then once they've had a chance to kind of sit in that space of productive struggle, then we pull them back together. We debrief. Okay, what'd you do? What questions did you have? What like ahas happened for your group? And then you follow with instruction and modeling. And what's fascinating about that workflow is that students are so much more interested in the instruction when they've had a chance to kind of struggle a little bit together, which I love that. We always want kids to be kind of like leaning into the instruction and the experience. I love to kind of do a modified interactive modeling session. And I actually have it be an I do, a we do, a you do, or a groups do, then a you do. So it's a little bit more of a gradual release where the teacher will start with the explanation and model. They will engage the group running through another example. Then if they can use breakout rooms or even just kind of split the teacher-led station into smaller groups in the actual classroom, let the groups kind of try another example on their own. Can they do it without any teacher support? And then you pull them back together in debrief, and then you give them time to engage in the you do. And this is the piece I see neglected sometimes on video conferencing sessions is it's like, okay, I did an example, we worked through an example, now you're going to do it on your own. But it's often when we release to the you do, the kids struggle, they hit bumps, they have questions. And so, making time for that for even the kids who are in the online teacher-led station becomes important so that if they hit a bump, they don't feel alone and frustrated. We're still there to support that process. I work with a lot of teachers who spend quite a bit of class time, like going over homework and assignments. And I would love to see homework that is practice and review kind of used to guide the focus at some of these stations. So if the teacher thinks it's valuable enough to spend some time going over an assignment, then how about we at the station start by giving kids an answer sheet, an exemplar, and give them time to check, correct, and capture their questions. What did they answer correctly? What did they miss? What are they missing in their assignment? And then use that to kind of guide this session. So whatever this group is struggling with, whatever questions they missed, whatever parts of the assignment were challenging, let's spend some time digging into that together in this station. If you do have teachers who really, really want to do direct instruction in their teacher-led time, then my message is break it up, right? Follow kind of a present, pause, discuss, repeat strategy, where we're chunking the introduction of new information to 3 to 5 minutes. Again, just remembering that working memory is really small, and talking for extended periods of time, it's very hard for students to take that in and process it. It's very easy for them to get confused. And so 3 to 5 minute present information. Give students, they can take notes on paper, on a collaborative Google document if you want to pull kids together, and then just pause. Give them a minute and a half, 2 minutes, just process what they heard, catch up on their notes, ask any questions that occurred to them, and use their questions to just facilitate kind of an informal conversation. So we can make sure you understand what was presented before I dive into the next chunk and you feel totally lost as a learner. And then the last strategy is beginning with a quick assessment. And this could be a Google form, it could be a Kahoot, it could be part of a Pear Deck presentation, whatever your teachers are using. But give kids a quick assessment to kind of gauge what are they understanding, where are the gaps, and then use that assessment data to provide some targeted instruction. And quite frankly, if there's like 3 kids who nailed the assessment, how do we release them to do something to continue making progress while we keep the kids who really struggled and do some reteach, some modeling, some guided practice with them? So in this first station rotation focused breakout room, I would love for you guys to collaborate and start to plan a station rotation. And you can do this in one of 2 ways. So you, depending on whether your group wants to think about leveraging this model for an administrative meeting, right? Or a professional learning experience, you can create a model lesson for teachers if you want. So you can say, oh, let's do a model English lesson for station rotation, or a model science lesson, or design a learning experience for your staff using this model, right? If they see you using this model in your work with them, they're more likely to really believe in the value of this for their students. So it's great if they can experience it as a learner in a staff meeting or a professional learning experience, and then kind of have that to build on as they're trying to do this with kids. So regardless of whether you're doing a model lesson to like share with actual teachers, or whether you're using this strategy to design a professional learning experience, you're going to identify kind of a focus standard or skill or objective that you want to be the focus of your teacher-led or leader-led station. I would love for you to play around with one of those 5 strategies that we just talked about. That way you can be modeling a specific strategy for structuring your teacher-led station. So because, like I said, as soon as we get into a breakout room, you guys won't see this. I have for you in Mentimeter this task broken down. So it has the short links as well, so you can make a copy of that virtual station rotation template. It also has a short link for those 5 ways to structure your teacher-led station. And again, if you guys have questions as you're working, I'll keep an eye on the Mentimeter question icon down here. Feel free to post it. And if you want me to try to jump into your room, it takes a second because they have to assign me. But if you have a question and you want me to come into your room, just make sure to include your breakout room name or number in that request so I know where to go. All right, so if we can initiate the breakout rooms, get folks back together so they can start thinking through their teacher or leader-led station, that would be great. All right, so I think we have most people headed back into the main room. And just to nudge you guys, like when you guys are in your breakout rooms we have 3 your turns during this station rotation. I would love you guys to actually get on a shared document and work to create something. So, there's conversation that happens naturally as we're thinking through, okay, what would this look like in a staff meeting or part of a professional learning kind of event that we're going to be hosting at some point in the near future for teachers, but actually getting into the weeds on a document and saying, okay, here's something that I actually as a leader would want to kind of introduce to teachers. And I could use this small group teacher-led or leader-led station to do that. This is what it might look like. And which of these strategies can I use to structure this? If you guys start kind of tinkering and putting something together during this session, you're more likely to kind of carry it to the next step and implement it. Just like a teacher, right? If a teacher's in a professional learning and they have a chance to kind of start thinking about what does this look like for my grade level, my subject area, they're more likely to then try a station rotation on their own. So when we go into the next room, if you guys didn't actually, you're kind of talking about it and thinking about how to get teachers on board with this, I would really also kind of split some time and think about how you could create a station rotation you could use, whether it's an example of one for a specific subject area or grade level, or whether it's one you want to use as a leader. So then we have the online station, and there are a range of different things that teachers can do with their online station, from, like I said, personalized practice with a program like Dreambox or Lexia or IXL or whatever kids are using to practice specific skills. But then also thinking about like multimedia lessons. Are we engaging kids around different kinds of media, podcasts, videos? Like how might we leverage those kinds of media for learning? What role might asynchronous discussion play in an online station, right? It's a little tricky to facilitate discussion when you have kids in class and online. And so, of course, you can do some real-time discussion with the kids online chatting and small groups of students talking in the classroom. But there's also some room for leveraging kind of asynchronous discussion where kids have a little more control over the time and the place and the pace at which they're contributing. Research and exploration is really a wonderful thing to kind of make a staple of online station work, only because kids have so much access to information. They are terrible researchers, right? They do not know how to conduct a savvy search. Most of them are not asking questions to assess website credibility. And so how do we build, opportunities for them to practice and hone some of those really important skills? So as we think about online learning, just kind of nudging our teachers to think bigger. And even for, when I was working with teachers pre-COVID, I'm like, you can use technology at an online station. It doesn't need to be the focus, right? It could just be a tool that kids are using to accomplish a task. So as we think about online learning stations during this moment, one of the things I challenge teachers to do is to use the lens of the 4 C's as they're planning it. So do they want to prioritize critical thinking, creativity, communication, and/or collaboration? I think these are really important things to be thinking about as we create those online stations. So hopefully we're not always just kind of putting kids on a program and asking them to practice, but we really are kind of keeping it varied, the kinds of things kids are doing online. Because some of those personalized practice, I've seen it, especially at the elementary level, if that's all kids ever do at the online station, they get really disillusioned with the technology station or the online station. So just how do we mix it up? And I wish I saw more teachers really thinking about how to leverage online discussions, because online discussions are a staple of online learning. Like you can't take an online class without engaging in some kind of a discussion. And so how do we really pull that into our classes, maybe using the online station, where we give students a chance to connect with other members of the learning community, even those who are not physically in the room, and learn with and from one another. It's a great way to expose them to different points of view and perspectives on topics. We can use online discussions to really challenge students to orient the new learning, and to kind of think about like, how does this connect to what I already know? How does it fit in with kind of those existing schemas that I already have? Because the more they make connections between what they already know, their existing knowledge, and this new knowledge, the more likely they are to kind of retain this information they're learning. We can really drive that higher order thinking around specific topics, improve retention and understanding as kids are kind of talking through concepts, practice those online communication skills, right? As much as kids are online, they're not engaging in academic discourse online. So how do we help them to develop this skill set? We do give, if we have an online discussion, so, kids are in an online station, they're responding to a Google Classroom question, or they're recording a Flipgrid response, then we give kids who might not be comfortable entering a rapid fire real-time discussion the opportunity to have a voice in this class conversation, which I think is really important. And then last but not least, it really shifts students from consumers of other people's ideas to producers, generators of their own ideas, which I think is a really important shift. Now, when I coach teachers around using online discussions, there's a lot of skill building that has to happen for teachers and for students, right? We really naturally kind of lead those in-class discussions, but when it comes to online discussions, there are things that we want to consider to make them run as smoothly as possible. So one, we want to treat our title like a hook. We keep it creative, keep it catchy, keep it interesting so that kids want to lean into the conversation. I also encourage teachers, as they're kind of thinking through their questions, try to subtly differentiate for the wide range of learners in a class by the kinds of questions you're asking. So if teachers only ask one question, there's only like one entry point into the conversation. Whereas if they start with maybe their most academically rigorous question, and then they have like the next question's a little more accessible, the language is a little simpler, and then a third question that's maybe more reflective in nature, that's even more accessible in terms of language we're using, then we're allowing kids multiple entry points into the conversation. So our kids who don't understand that first question, they're not sure how to answer that really academically rigorous question, they have other ways to get involved in this conversation that are meaningful. I encourage teachers to use a range of question types. So like as an English teacher, I definitely gravitate toward analytical questions. I would ask kids a lot of analytical questions. So I had to really be aware of that propensity and then push myself to integrate debate topics and compare and contrast and reflective questions, just so that kids weren't always faced with the exact same kind of question when I wanted them to engage in an online discussion. I used to recommend including media, and now, quite frankly, I'm like, we are teaching such a visual generation, like media is a must. So whether it's a photograph or a graphic or an infographic or a video clip, like something to get them kind of thinking about the topic, and hopefully more likely to engage in the conversation. And then I remind teachers that you can tell kids all day long, like, yes, after you respond to the question, you have to reply to X number of peers. But if you don't put it in the actual question kids are reading, they're just going to forget about it. So making sure that before we kind of post a question, we're really clear about that engagement with other kids, like what's expected. Because if they're just answering our question, that's like digital homework submission, and that's not magical. The magic of online discussions is in their interactions with each other. So we really have to clearly signal that, like, hey, once you've posted your response, read the responses posted by your peers and reply thoughtfully to at least 2-3 other members of the class. And here are some suggestions for how you can do that in a substantive way. Complement strong points made, ask questions, build on ideas shared. So as you guys get into your breakout rooms, and hopefully you've started kind of thinking through your station rotation lesson, be it a model lesson or one you plan to use as a leader, you want to identify that focus standard or skill if it's a model lesson, or just your objective as a leader for this online station. And then think through, what technology tool do you want to use? What online resource? Maybe do you want to model? So if you as a leader are like, oh man, I love Flipgrid, Flipgrid's awesome, then make Flipgrid something that teachers are going to have to engage with at the station. If you're like, I love this idea of academic discourse, I wish more people were using online discussions, then craft an online discussion prompt, right? Pair it with a video clip, ask teachers to engage with each other around a topic. And then if you can, I'd love that at least one of those 4 C's to be kind of the focus as you're thinking about designing the station. Can you prioritize critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity at this station that you're designing? And then remember, you guys you can find me, you can ask a question just by posting it to the online station slide if you guys have them. So the directions here for the second your turn are right on this slide. And if you have questions, you can find me. So we're going to initiate another round of your turns, get you guys back into your breakout rooms. If you didn't get a chance to start your template or start working on an actual template, an actual station rotation, there's no time like the present. So feel free to double back and do the teacher-led or focus on this online one. All right. So I think we have everybody back in the main room, and I was in a breakout room where just kind of addressing some questions about what this could look like for kind of the leader-led or teacher-led experience versus that online experience, and thinking about the online experience. Like I said, really, if you're going to be modeling this in any kind of a staff meeting or a professional learning scenario, really using it to kind of nudge teachers in a direction that you think is really worth spending time on, whether it's a specific technology tool that you're like, I think this would be really great for teachers, Flipgrid, Nearpod, Edpuzzle, whatever. If they experience something as a learner, they're more likely to be intrigued about, okay, how might this work with my own students? So kind of like using it as your opportunity, like I said, to kind of advance things that you really believe are valuable. The next station, and we'll do the last year turn around this one. So if I kind of cut you off and you were mid-station design, you'll have one more year turn together, is that offline station. And so I just want teachers to think bigger than worksheets or, pen and paper practice. What are some of the other ways to engage kids offline? And so kind of stretching their thinking around, like, are there opportunities for, problem solving or little kind of experiments or art projects, or even if it's just like I know offline discussions are a little tricky right now because of masks and movement. So even reading and writing tasks, like how are we keeping it varied, the kinds of things we're asking kids to do in the offline station? And I think the offline station right now presents a really interesting opportunity for some student agency. One, because if kids are learning at home, we can't necessarily assume that they have all the resources they might have in a physical classroom. So with some choice, they can choose to kind of pursue activities that are possible given their home environment. And I like teachers to think about the offline station through the lens of agency, and like, where could we potentially give students some choice, make some decisions about their learning? And typically there are kind of like 3 places in a lesson or a learning experience where teachers more generally might want to think about giving students agency, giving them some voice and choice. One might be around the what. So if we're kind of focusing on a big topic, is there a smaller aspect of that larger topic kids might want to dig into or learn more about? Is there a particular lens they want to look through for an assignment? Maybe we give them some agency over the how, right? The process by which they move from point A to point B, or the tools they use to get something done. In a more general kind of context, even for not as part of a station rotation, more generally, in this moment, we may just give them simple options about, like, do you want to do this online? Do you want to do this offline, right? Do you want to create a digital poster or a paper poster? Those little those little decisions around process, I think can be really helpful in allowing students to feel like they can be successful navigating a particular task. And then there's also a lot of opportunity to differentiate kind of the products that kids produce by allowing them to just choose. How do you want to surface your learning? Why are we learning this? And what do you want to create to demonstrate that you learned something? So for me, that offline station really lends itself to kind of some of that voice and choice and engaging students. And one of the strategies I've leaned on really heavily when working with teachers right now is, could you create a project choice board or a choice board for this offline station to guide student work, right? And so when I work with teachers around designing choice boards, whether it's to be kind of the guide for an offline station where over the course of a couple station rotations, they choose different activities in the choice board to engage with, or whether it's just using a choice board as a strategy to engage the whole class, there are a lot of benefits to using and designing choice boards. Obviously, not every student enjoys the same kind of tasks. So with a choice board comes that powerful motivator of getting to choose where we spend our time and energy. Students have a little bit more control over the pace at which they navigate the tasks within a choice board. We can use choice boards to kind of offer activities at different levels of rigor. So I was working with a third grade teacher 2 weeks ago, and we we're putting together a choice board, and it had blue squares and purple squares. And the purple squares were the stretch squares, the idea that they were going to be a little bit more challenging. And so for certain students, she would tell them like, oh, I'd love for you to do a purple square and really see if you can stretch, to kind of give students that incentive to maybe try something that is a little more challenging. It increases ownership. And I think a lot of teachers and, maybe leaders too, think of choice board as just a collection of fun activities, but they can very much be grounded in specific standards and skills. So there are a variety of different kinds of choice boards that teachers could design. So thinking about the various purposes of a choice board, right? We could have one that's standard aligned where each column targets a very specific standard, but gives kids different ways to engage with that standard or skill. You could have a choice board that is dedicated to a particular subject area. So it could be an entire science-based choice board. You could have a thematic choice board. So it could be focused on something general like health and wellness, or a physical activity choice board. Or I was just working a few weeks ago in preparation for Dia de los Muertos on a Dia de los Muertos choice board. So it could be thematic and align with something you're teaching, or it could focus on something that doesn't get as much attention like health and wellness, but is so important right now. Choose your own adventure choice board where kids get to engage with information and kind of surface their learning in a variety of ways. A review and practice board. So as kids are preparing for any kind of assessment, giving them the opportunity to select activities within a choice board to practice and review key concepts, vocabularies, processes, skills. And then creative kind of assessment boards where there's lots of different options for students to share or decide, how do I want to share my learning? What do I want to create to demonstrate my learning? So like I said, we can drill down into specific standards. So this choice board, each of the columns targets a very specific English language arts standard. So thinking about their standards and which ones they want to target and how they want to kind of mix modalities and media and sprinkle in the technology as needed. Having offline choice boards, for this offline station is a great option. Really pushing kids away from the screen and letting them engage in more kind of tactile experiential learning. I worked with Dr. Maria Hersey to put together a series of well-being boards. So there was one for elementary kids and their parents or caregivers. There was one for secondary kids. There was one for teachers. And the idea is to engage in some of that mindfulness practice and kind of get that break from the screen as well. And then I did a call out on Twitter for teachers to share their boards, their choice boards. And I thought this example was so great because it was created in a remote learning scenario. But the idea was that kids would have these options to choose different kind of science science skills, first graders, to engage in. And so the choice board is built in a Google slide deck. And on that first slide, they can click whichever one of the science skills they want to focus on for the day. And the entire skill, it's like an offline science skill that they're spending 20 minutes engaging with. So I just thought it was like a fun way to think about getting kids like building a board around a subject and getting kids kind of engaging with kind of different topics and kind of work offline. So in this third and final breakout room, what I'm going to have you guys do is look at that station rotation template. We're going to focus on that offline learning activity. So you're going to choose a focus standard, a skill. If you're a leader planning a station rotation, you can focus on a particular objective. And then think about and talk about as a group, how will you build in a degree of student agency if it's a teacher lesson, or teacher agency if it's a leader lesson. So where is that voice and choice going to kind of emerge in this station? And if you want to play with the choice board template, I have a link to that. So you can make a copy and kind of think about, okay, if we're going to create an offline choice board, what would the focus be? Would it be subject, skill-based? Like, how would we want to design it? And just kind of talk through using a choice board. And a lot of times I'll see leaders use choice boards to engage teachers in professional learning outside of a structured meeting time, which again, it can be a nice way to give teachers options to kind of engage in learning that feels relevant and kind of start to kind of personalize their professional learning experience based on those specific needs. So again, you won't be able to see my screen as soon as we initiate breakout rooms. So on the Mentimeter, I have the description of this time and what you guys are going to be focusing on, as well as that short link to the choice board template if you want to play around with that. So we'll open up rooms one last time for you guys to collaborate around a station rotation, and then we'll come back together and we'll switch gears and talk about flipped learning. All right, so I think we have most people back in the main room. And I really like to dedicate time to just some thought around planning these kinds of models, just because we went through this one, you had some mirror turns with station rotation. I think sometimes even for leaders, that one, and trying to imagine how to use it with staff, it's helpful to have some sounding boards. The other two that we're going to cover, I think, are teachers, it's easier for them to imagine what they'll look like. But part of why I really like station rotation, as I said at the very beginning, for the concurrent classroom, is if teachers are breaking the larger class into smaller groups and rotating those groups on kind of a set schedule, like you're going to spend 20 minutes in each station and we're going to rotate, air quotes, rotate, not physically going anywhere, but moving between learning activities, then that teacher really is spending equal time with each group, regardless of whether that group is in the classroom or online, or a combination of the two if they have mixed groups and students, they're offering all of their teacher-led station via Zoom for kids in class and online. And so when we think about that, inequality of teacher attention, it's one way to make sure each group is getting a certain amount of time with the teacher. And so the teacher can decide, is it easier for me to have the groups composed of kids in class and those online in separate groups so that I can do my teacher-led station offline for the kids in the physical classroom, and then I can join the kids online in a video conferencing session to provide them with the teacher-led station? Or, like I said, do we want to experiment with mixed groups where kids in class are connected to kids online, right? So if we're thinking about intentional grouping strategies, there may be times when that makes sense. I really encourage teachers just to make sure the rotation flows more seamlessly and they're not constantly being interrupted by student questions, is really get comfortable recording the directions for each station. Just a little video like, hey, everybody at this station, this is what you're going to do. First, you'll do this, then you'll do that. I find that for young learners, video directions are great if they don't have strong reading skills. But even for older learners, they are just more likely to watch your short video than read your text directions. I cannot tell you how many times in a station rotation I spent 10 minutes typing up explicit directions, trying to anticipate every bump a student might hit, even putting in like pictures or screenshots of things they need to do. And they would sit down at the station, see my directions. I saw them see my directions, and they would say, Miss Tucker, what are we supposed to do? And I'm like, I'm leading a station over here. Read the directions. So if we can leverage video directions to guide work in the station, reduce the number of questions we might get, then that's great. And then, like I said at the beginning, creating a single pathway for all questions. So kids in the classroom aren't able to dominate the discussion or the questions or dominate the teacher's attention with their questions and requests for help. So I think that can be helpful. The second approach to kind of managing the concurrent classroom using a blended learning model is leveraging the flipped learning. So kind of think flipped classroom, recording videos, but not just recording videos, but building like a whole group rotation around that video content. So in a whole group rotation, the entire group is rotating between offline, online, offline activities. Now, this is more like an updated version of the classic kind of lab rotation where students would learn offline in the classroom and then they would all rotate into a computer lab to learn online. Now with like the number of schools that have gone one-to-one or have like Chromebook carts or device carts in a classroom, we don't necessarily have to leave a physical room to get kids online. So this whole group rotation can happen in the physical classroom. And what's nice about building a whole group rotation around video content is that, again, students get to control the pace at which they consume and process that information. They can pause a video, they can rewind it, they can watch it half a dozen times if they need to. For those learners who are learning remotely, as we create video content, we're also creating instruction and models that can be accessed by those remote learners and the people at home who are supporting them. So by capturing some instruction and models, then the parents, the caregivers assisting the student learning at home, they also have access to those resources. If you have any movement in and out of classes mid-year, or you have, long absences that happen, also that's really nice if you're in that situation with movement in and out or long absences, that kids also have access to that instruction and modeling online. As a teacher, it is so freeing not to have to repeat yourself over and over again. So capturing those explanations that typically kids do need to hear repeatedly in video content is really helpful. And then as we weave video into the physical classroom, it also frees the teacher from feeling that pressure of like, I need to be at the front of the room, explaining, directing, orchestrating. So creating some more opportunities for them to shift from that expert role we talked about and spend a little bit more time in that facilitator role. Now, there are a range of ways that teachers can use video. Obviously, they can use video to transfer information, capturing those mini lessons and lectures in video format. They can capture those models when they're demonstrating a process or conducting a think aloud, capturing that in video to create a support for kids who are working on their own or working remotely. Like I said, the directions or how-to explanations can be helpful in video. And then also just considering like how might video and video models support students who might be a couple steps behind the rest of the class. In this year and probably the next school year, we're likely to have this really wide range of skills and ability in our class. And so if you have a handful of kids who'd really benefit from some instruction that maybe the rest of the class doesn't need, or a model to support their work that maybe the rest of the class doesn't need, we can provide that support via video as well, without shining a light on in front of the whole class that these kids need additional support. The video can be almost like this resource they can access if they need it. Now, when I work with teachers around creating video content, we cannot create a video without teachers asking, how long should my video be? There was a study done in 2016, but it was a study of those MOOCs, the massive online open source courses. And it was trying to engage or trying to measure student engagement around video content. Now, most of the learners who sign up for a MOOC are adult learners. They're a voluntary course, so I think you have to take these results with a grain of salt. But what they found is that the engagement with video content peaked at 6 minutes. And there was a subtle drop off between 6 and 9 minutes, and then a much more dramatic drop off after 9 minutes. And so there might be a case to be made for 6 minutes being a bit of a sweet spot with video. But what I typically use as my guide when I'm coaching teachers is 1 minute of video content per year in school. So if we're going to use video for instruction, if I'm supporting a third grade teacher, we're typically shooting for like a 3 or 4 minute video. If I'm working with a ninth grade teacher, we're typically shooting for like a 9 or 10 minute video. And this rule of thumb has held up really well in my work coaching teachers all the way from kindergarten through 12th grade. So if you're looking for a guide, I think this is a helpful one. It's important for kind of teachers to understand how to make effective media. So as they're creating their media, there are specific things they want to keep in mind to make sure that media is as effective as possible. So the first one is this idea of segmenting and chunking. And so really focusing in on introducing small bits of information at a time. Again, working memory is small. We don't want to try to cover too much in a video. It's always going to be better to have a few shorter videos than one longer video. So for example, when I first started making videos to guide writing instruction, one of my first videos was like a 15 or 16 minute video on how to format an argumentative paragraph. And as I was actually going through and reading students' argumentative paragraphs and giving them feedback, I was realizing, some kids really struggle to write a claim. I wish I had a video about how to write a claim. Some kids are not very good at selecting textual evidence to support their claims. I wish I had a video on that. Some kids aren't introducing their quotes. Some kids aren't citing properly. Some kids struggle with analysis. And so what I ended up doing is kind of doubling back and making all these like micro resources. How to write a claim, how to choose textual evidence, how to analyze a claim, how to introduce your quotes. And those videos, those bite-sized videos, where they got so many more views by students who I think watched them over and over and felt they were like valuable resources. But for me as a teacher, when I was giving feedback, if students were struggling with a specific part of their writing, I just linked to that short video. And so for me, really segmenting and chunking made videos a better resource to point kids to long-term. The second tip is around signaling and cueing. And how are we directing the student's eye to the information we're talking about as we're talking about it? So can we underline or highlight keywords? Can we insert arrows or markers to direct student attention so they really are seeing what they're hearing at the same time? The third is about weeding, or is around this idea of weeding, which is exactly what the name suggests, right? We're removing anything unnecessary, anything that might burden the student's cognitive load. So removing any busy backgrounds, unnecessary images, really keeping our presentation clean and clear. And then the last is matching modality. And that's really thinking about, as we provide these explanations in the video, what are kids seeing? And does what they're seeing, what is kind of going into their visual and pictorial channel, does it align with what they're hearing in their audio verbal channel? So are there images or maps or graphics that we can include to kind of align those two things? So when I'm coaching teachers through this process, I usually encourage them to put their content together before they ever start recording. So I think for a lot of teachers, there's just this higher degree of intentionality that needs to happen when we're preparing to create video content. So I encourage teachers, choose a single concept or topic to kind of be the focus of your video. Then I actually have them put together their content on a slide deck. So they can use a Google slide deck, they can use a PowerPoint, but the goal is to really keep those 4 things in mind as they put together the information and their media. If they put their information together on a slide deck first, then that slide deck, they share their screen, they project the slide deck, and they record with the slide deck being what kids are looking at as they're hearing the teacher unpack the concepts or explain things. And if they put the information on the slide deck, then they can really think through, okay, what key words do I want to put on this deck? You don't want to write out full sentences because you'll have kids who are trying to write down every word that's on your slide deck. So you want to keep it really focused on the key ideas, key points. Whenever possible, including examples, media, if I'm a history teacher and I'm going through a moment in history, maybe I have a map and I'm inserting arrows to point to different moments or different parts of the map as I'm talking about this particular event or moment in history. So trying to figure out how do we blend the keywords, the text with the visuals on our slide. So we're shooting for this delicate balance of like clear and simple, yet visually compelling. And so once we have kind of our content and our media in place, really thinking intentionally about, am I chunking this? Am I aligning kind of that pictorial channel with the auditory channel in the brain? Then we start thinking about how do we help students to track the information on the video or in the video as they're watching it. And that's where animating elements of the slide deck become really helpful. So teachers can add an underline. So if there's a particular word or vocabulary term that they want to spend some time unpacking, or there's a phrase they want to direct students' eyes and attention to, they can underline keywords. They can put boxes around key phrases to kind of draw students' eye to that part of the slide deck as they're presenting it and recording the video. If there is a bulleted list, they can have the different bullets show up when the teacher's ready to talk about them. So they don't have kids 2 bullets ahead of them when they're explaining the first bullet. And if they have media, inserting those arrows to kind of draw students' attention to particular parts of the media that we might be talking about in a particular moment. So it's, whether we're using a Google slide deck and we're just going insert and animating a particular part of it, right? So insert animation, or whether we're in a PowerPoint doing the same thing, it's our opportunity to kind of aid students in tracking the information we want them to be following as we're kind of going through and presenting that information. So I was coaching a 7th grade teacher who wanted to create more videos so that she would have more time in class to meet with small groups. So the idea is that students would self-pace through the video lesson and she would pull groups to work with them. So she created this video, she anchored it in a standard, and she actually put the standard on that front slide. And as she's kind of unpacking the standard, she has specific words and phrases being highlighted or underlined to draw the student's eye to those particular words and phrases. Unfortunately, she had this whole table that kind of gave an overview of text features, and she didn't expect students to write it down. In fact, she told them before they watch the video, you don't have to write this down, but she didn't say it in the video. And so guess what? A lot of the class wrote this entire thing down. So what she expected to be like a 10-minute video ended up being this 20-minute like slog through this video because kids were writing everything down. Then she has this media embedded, and as she's talking about the text features, she's animated arrows to pop up and identify the text feature she's talking about as she's talking about it, so that students can be following the arrows and listening to her explanation and tracking the information more effectively. So the idea with this approach is teachers put all this together on the front end, and then they share their screen and they do a screencast. So they're recording what's on their screen, which is their presentation, and an audio track of their explanation. And the more effective we can be at using that animation feature without overdoing it, we don't want to make kids crazy with all the things flashing up in their faces, but really just kind of directing their eye, the more effective their video content is going to be. I think another thing, so the last step in this, when I'm working with teachers moving through it, is just the recording of the screencast. And there's tons of screencast tools that students can use. You may already have some that you've kind of adopted as a district. So whether it's the Screencastify Chrome extension, or it's Loom, or it's Screencast-O-Matic, any of those can be used to record the video. And then a lot of the videos, we can add closed captioning to them. They can add closed captioning to Screencastify videos. They can show students how to access closed captioning on YouTube videos. They can even show students how to slow down a YouTube video to try to make it more accessible. And obviously kids can pause it and rewind it and do all of that. But I think the message from us in a leadership position is your videos don't need to be perfect, right? A teacher's videos don't have to be perfect, right? Live instruction is rarely perfect. And I think this desire to create perfect videos is often a bit of a stumbling block for teachers, because they're already a little nervous about, oh, I don't like my voice, or I don't want to be on camera, or whatever their particular situation may be, but really helping them to kind of shift some of these explanations out of the real-time experience, so we put students in control of consuming and processing this information in a way that works for them. I think it's really hard in a concurrent classroom to keep students in class and online attentive to direct instruction that's happening live for any length of time. It is very, very hard. So once they have videos, whether it's ones they've created or videos that they've curated, I also want teachers to think about, how are we wrapping that video content in a blended experience, right? Like, by itself, the video may not be super effective. So what is leading into the video, and what are kids doing when they exit out of the video? And so thinking about some of those pre-video activities that we might want to use to create some context for this video that kids are going to be watching. So do we want to pique students' interest and kind of expose them to some new ideas and get them talking? Do we want them to drive inquiry and surface their wondering about a topic? Maybe we want to challenge them to access their prior knowledge and share that, so we can figure out where are students starting in relation to this topic. And there are a bunch of different ways that we can do this in class, offline or online. As I'm working with teachers in this concurrent classroom, I'm a big fan of having the entire class start engaging in the same kind of an activity where they are brainstorming. So maybe they're brainstorming on a Jamboard, or maybe they're doing kind of a sharing their prior knowledge in a quick online discussion prompt. And so kind of starting the class together, online kids and in-class kids, so they feel connected and they understand where this lesson is going. And then we have that middle section, which is the flip and engage, right? That's where they watch the video. And hopefully we're asking them to do something as they watch the video that will encourage them to think critically about the information in the video. So I don't want them to like slip into this role as passive receivers of information. I want them thinking critically about the information in the video. So teachers might want to wrap a video in like an ed puzzle lesson, where they drop some questions, short answer, multiple choice, into the video, so that as kids are watching the video, they're prompted to stop periodically and answer a question. Now I have to think about what I heard in the video to answer this question. And those answers provide the teacher with some really important formative assessment data about what kids are getting and what's not making sense for them. They could also pair a video with like an online discussion prompt, where they ask kids to pull out some key ideas or ask questions in response to a video, or maybe provide like a guided note template so that kids have a sense of what is it I should be listening for and looking at in this video in order to complete my guided notes. And then the post-video activity is, how are we going to encourage them to take what they just got exposed to in the video and do something with it, right? Practicing and applying, doing some online review. So we might have them reviewing concepts and vocabulary with an online review kind of tool. Could be like a quizzes or a Kahoot. They could make their own flashcards and Quizlet based on the information from the video. They might engage in a writing prompt or even like a concept map activity where they take some key concepts from the video and try to kind of show the relationships between them. So lots of different ways to think about it, but I think we need to be really intentional about wrapping this video content in engagement activities, both on the front end, during, and on the back end of the video. And so we can start the class together in a concurrent classroom with the pre-video activity. We can allow students to self-pace through the flip and engage. And while they're doing that, if we build a buffer of time around the video, so if I have kids watching a 6-minute video, but they have to answer some questions, maybe I give them 20, 25 minutes to self-pace through that experience, then I can be checking in with students online, in the classroom, really using that time for that connection piece as a teacher, and maximizing it. So for me, one of the things that when we're lesson planning, I think is helpful is to have teachers design using a template. And I'll share this link with you guys so that you can share it with teachers if it would be helpful. But it's really about thinking about how do we chunk the class period? How are we going to start with that pre-video activity? What is that flip and engage with the video and the engagement activity going to look like? How are we going to exit out of the video? And the post-video activity, maybe we release kids in the virtual part of the class to work asynchronously, depending on the group and the age level. Maybe we use it as an opportunity for them to do the practice and apply together as a group or in pairs in breakout rooms, just thinking really flexibly about group formations. And then I'm a big fan of ending these lessons with like an exit ticket. And it can be super short. It could be some quick questions about the day and how it went, or questions about specific content that was covered, but really kind of collecting some data that we can revisit as a teacher to see how effective was this experience for students. Did they learn specific concepts? Did they kind of struggle with anything in particular? So like I said, when we think about flipped learning in the context of a concurrent classroom, we might want to consider kind of that strategy of beginning the class together. And this might be an opportunity for some mixed groupings, right? So if they're going to be working on a pre-video activity, maybe we can have kids from the classroom and online working together and idea sharing on, like I said, a Jamboard or a Padlet wall or wherever you want to engage them. Allowing some of that self-pacing through the video part of that 3-part lesson, and really maximizing that time as a teacher to kind of connect with individual students who might need more from us, more scaffolding, more explanation, or maybe who have missed a few classes. So we want to check in with them and see how they're doing and what they need from us. So really maximizing that time when kids are self-pacing, and then encouraging that practice and application. So again, as with any kind of approach to kind of managing the demands of a concurrent classroom, I really think it's important to have that one avenue for questions so that as kids need support, they're all utilizing that single avenue, and it doesn't create quite the same inequality of teacher attention. And then as the teacher, really finding ways and creating space to support individual and small groups of learners as they work. So that's the flipped learning model, along kind of with a pairing of like that whole group rotation. And then the last one I wanted to kind of speak to, which I think can be really powerful in this moment, and a lot of teachers are playing around with, is the idea of the playlist model. And the playlist is great because it does give students a really high degree of agency over their pacing. So they have a lot of control over the pace at which they move through a playlist. And the idea with a playlist or an individual rotation model is there are a series of learning activities that students progress through. Almost all the playlists I've ever designed are sequential. So students are moving through the playlist in a particular order as one activity kind of builds on and complements the next. Though I have heard of some folks who do it out of order, but that has never been kind of the approach that I've used to design them. The paths of a playlist can be at the very least differentiated, but hopefully I'd love to see teachers getting closer to personalizing the playlist. I think that there are ways to do this that are sustainable. And I think sustainability is something I want more people in education kind of talking about when we onboard teachers to strategies. Playlists create clarity in terms of like what kids are working toward because the entire path is there. So as opposed to like traditional approach to teaching where every lesson is just kind of like a new target, a new assignment, these kids have this kind of path they're walking to create something. We can mix media and different learning modalities to try to keep kids interested and motivated and engaged. I encourage teachers to build teacher checks into the playlist and really spend time conferencing with students as they progress through the playlist, because it's during those conferences where teachers can give feedback on the work that kids are doing. They can identify areas where the kids might need to spend a little bit more time, or where they might need more support than the playlist is giving them. And then in that conferencing and in those moments with students, we, like I said, get to pull feedback. And then at the very end of the playlist, whatever it is kids have been working on or creating, how do we create some space for the teacher to basically have a side-by-side, either physically or virtually, kind of assessment conversation where they look at what kids created during their progress through the playlist, and then assess that using standards aligned rubrics so that kids understand why they're getting the assessment scores that they're getting on whatever this product is that they produced. So often teachers will ask like, okay, well, what would you make the focus of a playlist? Almost anything can be a playlist. In fact, I have teachers right now who are creating a playlist for each week. So each week they're working with kids, they're creating a playlist. The activities kids are going to be self-pacing through. And then the teacher time is all value add, right? So they pull groups of students and do some additional instruction. They pull groups of students for feedback sessions and coaching. So it gives the students a path, but it frees the teacher to be able to work with small groups and individual students. So teachers can literally take a classic unit of study and make a playlist out of it. You can make a playlist out of a collection of grammar concepts or the parts of speech. I've made playlists where the focus is helping to guide students through the process of writing a formal piece of, whether it's an essay or a narrative, or you could do project-based playlists. So design thinking projects in the form of a playlist. I've used the 5 E's instructional model to create a playlist, which is more student-centered inquiry. So lots of ways to kind of tackle the playlist model. And the playlist is composed of a lot of different kinds of individual kind of learning activities. So often at the start of a playlist, I'll record a screencast, which again is just a recording of what's on my screen, walking kids through the playlist. Like, here's what you're going to do. This is the objective. Here's when you're going to meet with me. If you have questions, here's where you're going to post them. And so just kind of familiarizing students with the playlist experience at the very start. One of my concerns about the playlist, even though I'm a big fan of it, is really around the amount of time kids are staring at a screen. And so really being aware of integrating offline activities into the playlist to kind of give kids a break from the screen. Building in on-demand instruction into the playlist, providing kids with models in the playlist so that as they get to a particular task, they have the explanation and the support they need in that moment. Often when I'm working with teachers, we're really focused on how do we build mechanisms into the playlist to collect formative assessment data. So at the beginning of the playlist, can we kind of get a sense of students' prior knowledge? And as they make progress through the playlist, can we insert online quizzes or fun review games to just test what are kids understanding, what are they getting, where are the gaps? There's conferencing built into the playlist. Self-assessment and reflection are really important parts of a playlist. And then, like I said, whatever kids are creating, the playlist should give us the opportunity to assess that product with the kids physically or virtually kind of near us so they can understand why they're getting the assessment scores they're getting. So I'll share two examples of playlists with you, one being an elementary version of a playlist, and the next being kind of a secondary version of a playlist. So I was coaching a third grade teacher who wanted to do kind of a research writing playlist. And right off the bat, the students got to make a choice. So he said, you're going to focus on an animal of your choice for this playlist. And so that degree of agency right off the bat got kids really excited about the playlist. And his playlist was pretty academically rigorous. So kids were going to be doing some research. We even put together a custom Google search engine so they could try researching without letting them loose on the internet. And then as they made progress through the playlist, there were these bars, these big red, like thou shall not pass, where students were directed to check in with him so they could kind of look at how are they making progress, where might they need to double back and spend some more time. So even at, the elementary level, kind of guiding students through some of this self-paced work is possible if there are supports and check-ins built into that experience. Now, at the secondary level, I have used the playlist model for formal writing assignments and getting kids kind of making progress toward, like I said, a written product. So you'll see there's like a path in my playlist. There's a direction column in my playlist. There's a place for kids and myself to add notes to their playlist because I just created the playlist right inside of a Google document so we can both kind of access it. And then kind of a date for when things are completed within the playlist. And so again, finding ways to build agency into the playlist. So as they're exploring arguments, kind of reading a famous speech of their choice and breaking down the parts of the argument, building in that on-demand instruction. So if I'm asking kids to write a thesis statement, do they have access to a video explaining how to go about writing a thesis statement before I'm asking them to do it themselves? And then building in those quizzes and checks throughout the playlist so that kids are kind of being asked to review information, concepts, vocabulary, but then it's also giving me some really valuable data about where they're at and what they're struggling with. And then you'll see those big yellow bars in my playlist where when kids hit that point, then we conference. And it's during those conferences where we can get closer to personalization. So you'll notice after the yellow bar, there's like a clipboard that just says personalized, focused, TBD, so to be determined. So when I meet with the student, because they're at that specific spot in the playlist, not only am I looking at what they've produced as a writer, but kind of what are their scores on some of this formative assessment data telling me? And then what did they need as a learner to keep making progress? And that's a conversation between me and the student to try to figure out what do they need from me to continue being successful in this playlist. And so I can add additional supports, I can add practice, I can pair them with another student who's doing something really well, because quite frankly, I can't know what every kid needs at the start of a playlist, right? I can begin by differentiating the experience, but it's really in that conferencing time when I'm going to be able to work with the learner to look at what they're doing and figure out what do we need to add to your playlist? What adjustments do we need to make so that this is really working for you as an individual learner? So when I work with teachers and we're kind of co-planning and putting together a playlist, we start by making what I call like the version 1 middle of the road playlist. This is the playlist that, the average student in the class, they're going to be successful with. And so we put together the path for this version 1 of the playlist. Once we have that version 1 done, then we go to file, we make a copy, and we work on a V2, right? And this is always the next level playlist. So for those students who are ready for more challenge, more rigor academically, let's create a playlist that speaks to where they're at. So they might be working on a slightly different product. They might not have as much repeat instruction in their playlist. They may not have as many teacher check-ins in their playlist, and they might have more academically rigorous practice and activities in their playlist. So we'd make that next level playlist for the kids who really need to be nudged to kind of continue making progress. And I think sometimes that's the group of students, at least for my own experience as a teacher, I spent way more time thinking about how to scoop up the kids who are struggling and not as much time thinking about how do I continue to challenge those kids who are ready for another challenge, who are really strong academically, because I don't want to lose their interest because they're not being challenged. So once I have that V2 done, then I go back to my first version, that middle of the road playlist. I make another copy of it, and then I create a more scaffolded version. So in the more scaffolded version, again, the end product they're creating might be different. They may have more models, video models built in, more on-demand instruction built in, more teacher check-ins built in, more emphasis on review and practice around skill building. It just depends what the playlist focus is, but we can basically start with 3 different versions. So I'm differentiating for 3 different levels within the class. And then as they move through the playlist, then during those teacher check-ins, I can create that time to figure out, okay, for you as a learner, how do we begin to personalize this playlist and support you in continuing to make progress? And I think that's one way to approach this that feels more doable than telling teachers, oh, you can personalize a playlist. And in their minds, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm making 150 versions of this playlist. How is that sustainable? So really kind of giving them more clarity around how to approach differentiation and personalization within a playlist. And then I have this template. Again, I'll throw this into the chat window for you guys. And I did get a question about my slide deck. I can make it a PDF and share it with you guys. Or share it with the organizers and they can share it with you. That's not a problem in case there's stuff you guys want to revisit. And then the beauty of the playlist within the concurrent class is that the teacher isn't trying to orchestrate a kind of like a show for the kids in class and online the whole time. Each student is making progress on their playlist, and then the teacher is really spending time with individual learners supporting their progress through the playlist. I did have one teacher who was working in a concurrent classroom and was playing around also with having pairs of students working off the same playlist document. So she would pair students, share the playlist with them as a can edit file, and then basically that online student and the in-class student had opportunities to ask each other questions and interact in this shared space of this Google document as they were working through it. And that created kind of a support network, especially for the student online who wasn't benefiting from, some of the conversations necessarily that were happening in the classroom. So really kind of thinking about how do we support kids in a playlist? How do we create some opportunities for collaboration within a playlist, even if that's just 2 students who have access to one another as they're making progress. And then, for those teacher checks, having an avenue for students to communicate with the teacher. Hey, Tucker, I'm at check-in number 3 on my playlist. And sometimes they need to wait, right? Because the teacher's tied up with somebody else. So what's something that they can be doing? Is it reading or another activity as they wait for the teacher to be able to meet with them for their teacher check? And if it's a group in class, then that could be a conversation in real time. If it's somebody online, then that can happen in a video conferencing session. But having kind of those may-dos, the permission to work on other things, so that as kids are waiting for their conference, they're not just cooling their heels. So a playlist can be another nice option for that. So we've kind of covered a lot of ground in this session today, right? We talked about the community of inquiry as a way to think about teacher roles in a blended or online class, kind of exploring the station rotation, flipped learning, as flipped learning plus whole group rotation, and then the playlist. And each of these different models are fleshed out in a chapter in the book you all have. So hopefully as you're reading that, you're kind of thinking about how it might work to support teachers in the concurrent classroom. And then I wanted to give you guys kind of a chance to think about, based on kind of what we've covered, for you, what's something that really resonates or you're going to kind of take away from today's session, or that you're excited to share with teachers that you think might really be helpful given the teaching situation that they're in. So I'm going to mute myself, give you guys a couple minutes, and I will check in the chat because I know some comments have been posted there. All right, so lots of different things resonating with people. Some folks really appreciating kind of thinking through the asynchronous versus synchronous. Seems like there's a lot of excitement about station rotation and using it in this context. I love the comment like, okay, it's good to know we're on the right track. We're already doing some of these things. It just takes some refinement. For some folks, it sounds like, modeling some of this for teachers will be really helpful. Really digging in a little deeper around student agency and that differentiation personalization piece sound like they're kind of areas that are resonating with folks as well. And we know, like, the more we differentiate and personalize, get closer we get to meeting students' needs, the more they can control the pace, the more likely they are to stay engaged. So some great takeaways, and also some folks like really thinking through the role that video could play. And video is so interesting because it really has a place in each of the different blended learning models as part of that kind of the way in which we kind of design and facilitate those models, which I think is helpful to just be aware of and thinking through. So from my perspective, just to kind of close, some final thoughts for you guys to kind of keep in mind. I love this quote that, let me see if I can get all this stuff out of the way so I can actually share my screen. There we go. It says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And we're definitely in this space of lots of change happening in education, and teachers are being faced with all these different challenges. And I think it's really how we as leaders and how teachers respond to them that can really lead to some exciting growth and hopefully some development of skills and strategies that we can take long after this current moment has passed. And so how do we as leaders support that process for teachers? And my advice as you kind of communicate with teachers in this moment is really encouraging them, kind of embracing the less is more mentality. Instead of getting fried trying to race through content and information, let's really focus on what matters most and make sure that we're creating learning experiences where students can access information, use the community, the learning community, to engage in that rich, deep learning. So hopefully they remember this stuff and they're able to transfer this learning. Really encouraging them to continue building, continue maintaining that community in class and online, right? That's not something that just happens one and done. It's something we have to keep nurturing. Encouraging them not just to dedicate time to their role as facilitator of learning, but like, let's really value that role, right? Let's talk about strategies that allow teachers to engage kids in goal setting, help them monitor and track their progress, give them feedback in a timely, consistent way, encourage them to remind them, right? Like how important student agency is. If you're hearing them frustrated by lack of engagement, remind them that the more students get to make decisions, the more voice and choice they have, the more likely they are to be motivated. Try to harness that student curiosity to kind of leverage for learning. Like, how do we get kids asking questions and exploring and tinkering to kind of learn together as part of this community? I think teachers really need to be proactive around skill building, especially some of this stuff that's happening online. Teachers get so frustrated when students don't do it well or they really struggle. And I'm like, as much as this is a new teaching landscape for a lot of teachers, it's a new learning landscape for a lot of kids, and they need support. We can't make a lot of assumptions about what they'll be able to do without our support, without scaffolds, without practice. And they're going to make mistakes. And can we just embrace those as part of this whole learning process? And then really being thoughtful, encouraging our teachers to really consider that asynchronous versus synchronous. Like, how are we leveraging the best aspects of each learning landscape? How are we maximizing the affordances of offline versus online learning in the design of our lessons? So if you guys have any last questions, you're welcome to throw them in the chat window. Happy to respond to them. I will add the link to the flipped learning concurrent template to that slide, because I think it's the only slide that doesn't have the link that you need. And then I will make this whole presentation a PDF and I will share it with the folks who organized this today, so that if you guys want to dig back through any of this, you're absolutely welcome. And I am online. I'm super easy to find. I am very active on Twitter. I share stuff all the time for teachers and leaders. So you can find me at Catlin_Tucker if you're on Twitter and you have questions, or you want to ask for more resources. And if you are not on Twitter, you're not on social media, you can always find me on my blog and ask questions or request resources there. So I want to thank you guys for spending 3 hours with me. I know it's a long time to be online, tuned into a Zoom call, but I appreciate getting the chance to work with you all.
Dr. Tucker, my name's Amy Garza, and I represent a group of principals. I'm an elementary principal. And one of the customs of our culture at Southwest is to express our gratitude at the end of any visitor that comes to visit. You are now our family. So we just want to say thank you for your time and for helping us to ramp up our blended learning game. It was engaging. I was fully engaged the full 3 hours. I loved it. I took 6 pages of notes. So we truly appreciate it. And we just want to say thank you for giving us your time and for engaging us in great learning today. So thank you from us.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. And to all the participants, thank you for participating today. Thank you for your engagement. We hope you have a great day. Lizzie has included in the chat box a link for the Southwest ISD feedback and reflection. So please make sure that you fill that out as your exit ticket. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Thank you, Dr. Tucker.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.